My 5-year-old kept saying, "I don't like the girl who lives under my bed." At first, I laughed it off. Kids say weird things. I figured it was just another imaginary friend, this time a creepy one. He'd say it with this tired little voice, always at bedtime, always when the lights were off. "She talks too much, Mommy. She has bad teeth." I'd kiss his forehead, pull the blanket up under his chin, and tell him it was just a dream. The thing is, Orrin wasn't a dramatic kid. He wasn't the type to make up monsters or ghost stories. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and for months, he never slept through the night, always waking up at the exact same time, 3:17 a.m. every night. I didn't notice the pattern until I started checking the baby monitor timestamps. I'm a nurse. I work nights a lot, so my sister, Marcy, would come over sometimes to watch him. She started noticing the same thing, how restless he got just after 3 a.m., how he'd cry without remembering why. Some nights he'd sleep on the floor, pressed against the bedroom door. Other times he'd end up in my bed without me even knowing he'd climbed in. And then one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I heard him screaming. Not whining, not crying, screaming like he was being hurt. I ran into his room. He was standing on the bed, shaking, pointing underneath it. His eyes were wide, but he couldn't say a word. That night, I decided to put a camera in his room. I needed to know what was going on. I needed proof, or at least peace of mind. When I watched the footage the next day, felt cold all over. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Orrin sat up in bed, eyes open, breathing fast. And then, from underneath the bed, I saw a hand, small, pale, dirty fingernails. It grabbed the edge of the bed frame and pulled itself out. A girl, no older than Orrin, crawled out backwards, like her joints didn't work right. Her hair was long and tangled, covering her face. She moved like she'd done this before. She sat beside him. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He just looked at her like he was frozen. And then, slowly, the girl turned her head toward the camera. Her eyes were black, not dark, black, no whites at all. She stared into the lens. Then everything went static. The next second of footage was me bursting into the room. The girl was gone. That was the moment I stopped thinking my son had an overactive imagination. That was the moment I realized something was happening in that room, something I didn't understand, something that wasn't just a childhood fear. And it all started with a sentence I didn't take seriously. "I don't like the girl who lives under my bed." Before everything changed, our life was quiet. Not perfect, but peaceful in a way I had worked hard to build. My name is Jenna Moore. I'm 32, a registered nurse, and a single mom to my 5-year-old son, Orrin. We had just moved into a small rental house in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon. It was nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, old hardwood floors, a creaky back door. But it was ours. It felt like a new beginning. 3 years earlier, my husband died in a car accident on a rainy Thursday. One second, I was folding laundry, and the next I was holding the phone in silence, while a stranger explained that he hadn't made it to the hospital. I don't remember much after that, just weeks of trying to breathe through a fog thick with grief. Orrin was only 2 then, too young to understand what we'd lost, but old enough to know something in our world had broken. Since then, I've worked every kind of shift the hospital would give me, overnights, doubles, weekends, anything to keep the lights on and to avoid thinking too much. Orrin became my anchor, my reason to keep going. He's gentle, curious, loves dinosaurs and jelly toast, and can tell you the names of more ocean animals than I can count. We have bedtime routines that never change. Bath, stories, songs. He calls me Mama in this quiet voice, like he's handing me something delicate every time he says it. The move was supposed to be our fresh start. The house wasn't big, but it had a fenced yard and a little tree with a swing. Orrin picked his room right away, the one with the big window that let in the morning sun. He liked the way the light hit his pillow when he woke up. He called it his sun patch. For the first week, things felt normal. He played with his toys, drew pictures of sharks, and danced in the kitchen while I made dinner. But by the end of the second week, little things started happening. He began asking me to check under his bed every night. I thought nothing of it. Kids get scared of monsters sometimes. I'd pull back the blanket, kneel down with a flashlight, and say, "Nothing here but dust bunnies and a plastic stegosaurus." He'd smile, but only a little. Then he'd whisper, She doesn't like it when you look." The first time he said that, I felt something twist in my stomach. I asked him who she was, but he just turned over and buried his face in his pillow. I chalked it up to a new house, a new room, maybe nerves. I didn't want to overreact. A few days later, I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me like he didn't know how he'd gotten there. I reached out and scooped him up, heart pounding. He was cold, sweaty, and shaking. I checked his forehead. No fever. He wouldn't talk, just clung to me like he thought I might disappear if he let go. After that, the 3:17 a.m. wake-up started. Always the same time. Always silent footsteps from his room to mine. Sometimes I'd hear a door creak or a whisper through the baby monitor, so faint it was hard to know if I imagined it. I started sleeping with my door open, just in case. I'd find him curled up outside it some mornings, asleep on the rug with his stuffed bear clutched against his chest. My sister Marcy came over one evening while I was working. She called me during my break, and I could hear the edge in her voice before she said anything. "Jenna, have you been watching him sleep?" I told her about the odd nights and the sleepwalking. She didn't laugh. Marcy doesn't scare easy, but she sounded unsettled. She said he woke up crying, saying he didn't want the girl with the hair face to come out. When Marcy asked what that meant, Orrin told her the girl's hair was over her face because she doesn't like people to see her mouth. That was when I started paying closer attention, not just to his words, but to the silence, to the way his toys would end up under the bed even though he said he didn't play there, to the lines of dirt or hair in places he couldn't reach, to the way he avoided looking toward the shadows under his bed frame. I told myself it was stress, that he was adjusting, that maybe he'd picked up something scary from a YouTube video or a story at daycare. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The air in that room felt wrong. Not cold, not haunted, just wrong. Still, I didn't know how serious it really was. Not yet. That was before the screaming, before the footage, before I truly listened to what Orrin had been trying to tell me all along. It wasn't just bad dreams. I realized that the moment Orrin stopped sleeping altogether, he started dreading bedtime. What used to be a soft and sweet routine turned into a slow, quiet protest. He'd stall. He'd ask for one more story, one more hug, one more trip to the bathroom. His body would shake as I tucked him in, and his eyes would dart to the floor beside his bed like he expected something to reach out and grab him. Every night he whispered the same thing before I left the room. "Don't turn off the light." I stopped arguing. I left the nightlight on, then added a small lamp across the room. I thought the extra light might help, but even fully lit, the room didn't feel safe anymore. He would lie there rigid, like he was waiting, not sleeping, just enduring. At 3:17 a.m., he would wake up without fail. I would hear the soft pad of his feet against the floor, the door creaking slightly as he crossed the hallway to my room. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, rocking. Other times, he'd crawl silently into bed with me, his tiny body stiff and cold. He never spoke during those hours. He just held on to me with both arms like I was the only thing keeping him from floating away. Then came the incident with the hair. It was a Saturday morning. Orrin had spent the night at Marcy's so I could get some rest. I decided to change the sheets in his room. As I lifted the mattress, I saw something underneath that stopped me cold. A clump of long black hair, tangled and twisted, knotted around one of the bed frame slats. It didn't belong to either of us. I pulled it out with shaking hands. It smelled like dust and something else. Something sour. I threw it away, but the feeling didn't leave me. I kept turning it over in my mind, trying to reason it out. Maybe it had been there when we moved in. Maybe it was nothing. But that same day, Orrin came home and asked if his room had been cleaned. I told him yes. He looked down and said, "She doesn't like when people touch her space." I asked him what he meant, and he turned away. I asked again, a little more firmly, and he said, "She lives under there, Mama. She says I'm not allowed to tell you what she looks like." My heart dropped. I sat down next to him on the floor and tried to get him to draw a picture or describe her. He refused. His face went pale. "If I talk about her, she gets mad," he said quietly. "She was really mad last night because I slept in your room. She scratched the bottom of the bed so hard it made my ears hurt." I checked the bed. There were deep gouges on the wood panel underneath. They looked like fingernails. I tried telling myself it was just his imagination, that he had scratched it himself during a tantrum or a nightmare, but deep down, I knew better. Orrin didn't have tantrums, he didn't destroy things, and he had never lied to me. Then came the night with the monitor. I had put the baby monitor back in his room, not to spy, but just to be able to listen while I cleaned up or sat in the next room. Around 3 a.m., I heard static. That wasn't unusual. But then I heard something underneath the static. A low whisper, soft but persistent. I leaned in, trying to make out the words. It was Orrin. He was whispering, "I'm sorry." I didn't mean to tell. Please stop being mad. Then there was a strange sound like a wet dragging noise, and the monitor cut to silence. I sprinted to his room. He was in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the bed. I picked him up. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He just clung to me, trembling. That was the moment I stopped pretending. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't stress. Something was happening in that room, and it was beyond anything I could explain. Whatever it was, it had gotten close to my son. Too close. And I wasn't going to wait for it to get closer. I didn't sleep that night. After I pulled Orrin from his room and brought him to mine, he clung to me like a child who'd been rescued from drowning. He didn't speak. He barely blinked. His fingers locked into the collar of my shirt as if letting go would mean something terrible would happen. I lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with this rising pressure that I didn't know how to contain. I was done waiting. The next morning, I called out of work. I told them I had a family emergency, and I meant it. I spent the day researching nanny cams. I ordered one online, then drove across town and picked it up myself from a store that had one in stock. It was small, discreet, and motion-activated with night vision. I didn't tell Orrin what it was really for. I just said it was a new camera to help the night fairy watch over him while he slept. He didn't believe me, but he didn't argue. That night, I set it up on his bookshelf. It faced the bed at an angle where it could catch anything that moved underneath or beside it. I tested it from my phone. It worked. I could watch a live feed, or it would save footage automatically whenever something triggered it. I gave Orrin a warm bath, put him in his softest pajamas, and read 2 books instead of 1. He looked up at me when I finished the second and asked, "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" I hesitated. I wanted to say yes, but if I let him, the camera wouldn't catch anything. I had to know what was happening. I had to see it with my own eyes. "Just for tonight," I said, brushing the hair from his face. "Can you be brave? I'll leave the door open. The nightlight is on. I'll be right down the hall watching over you." He nodded slowly. "If she comes out, don't open the door," he whispered. "It makes her go away." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I kissed his forehead, turned out the lamp, and left the door cracked open. I didn't go far. I sat just outside his room with my phone in my hand, watching the feed, barely breathing. The first 2 hours were uneventful. He tossed and turned a little, but eventually settled. Around 1 a.m., the motion sensor clicked on when he rolled over and kicked off the blanket. I reset the feed and watched it loop again. Again. Each time, my stomach tightened a little more. At 3:10, I started counting. When the feed triggered again at 3:17, my breath caught. Orrin sat straight up in bed, eyes wide, staring at the footboard. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just looked down, right where the shadows thickened under the mattress. And then I saw it. From beneath the bed, something shifted. I leaned closer to the screen. A hand, small, pale, slow, reached out from the dark. The fingers curled over the edge of the mattress and pulled. A figure emerged, moving in a way no child should. The limbs bent at strange angles, the head dipped too low, the body moving as if every joint was disconnected. It was a girl. She looked about Orrin's age. Her hair was long and black, falling over her face in thick strands. She wore what looked like a tattered white dress, stained at the hem like she had crawled through mud. She slid out from under the bed silently and sat beside him. Her body didn't rise and fall. She wasn't breathing. She turned her head toward the camera. I couldn't see her eyes behind the hair, but I felt them, like ice against skin. Orrin never screamed. He never moved. He just stared at her with tears rolling silently down his cheeks. Then she leaned in, her face lowered close to his. Her mouth moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. And then, in a single sudden moment, she dropped to the floor and crawled back under the bed, folding herself in like she had never been there. The feed went dark. I ran. I burst into his room, heart racing, terrified of what I'd find. He was sitting up in bed, staring at me. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked empty. "She was mad because I didn't tell you what she said," he said softly. "But she said you know now." That was the moment I stopped trying to explain it away. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't psychological. It was real. And it was in my house. I didn't sleep that night either. I couldn't. I watched the footage again and again, each time hoping I had imagined it differently. But every time, the same thing happened. The same slow crawl, the same unnatural movement, the same unbearable silence. The same girl. She was real. She was in my son's room, and she knew I had seen her. By morning, I had already packed a bag for Oren. I called Marcy, told her we were coming over, and didn't explain why. I didn't need to. She had heard the fear in my voice. I left the house with Oren still in his pajamas, clutching his stuffed bear with one hand and holding mine with the other. He didn't ask where we were going. He didn't say a word. Once we were safe at Marcy's house, I opened the footage again on my phone, planning to show her everything. The file was gone. I checked the saved folder. Nothing. I searched the app, the cloud backup, the motion alerts. All of it had been wiped clean. The only thing left was a blank screen and a timestamp, 3:17 a.m. I sat on the couch, frozen, staring at the screen, feeling my throat close. Marcy looked over my shoulder and said, "Where is it?" I couldn't answer. I was too busy trying not to fall apart. That afternoon, I drove back to the house while Oren stayed with Marcy. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street and sat there, staring at the windows, waiting to see if anything would move behind the glass. The house looked normal, nothing out of place, just a quiet little rental on a quiet street. But I knew better now. I pulled out my phone and searched the property records. I wanted to know who had lived there before us. I wanted answers, even if I didn't understand what kind of question I was asking. It didn't take long. The names came up on a public record search. The house had been owned by a foster family 5 years earlier. The article was buried in local news archives, but it was there. A report about a 7-year-old girl named Clara who died inside the home under unexplained circumstances. The foster parents claimed they had checked on her at bedtime, and by morning she was gone. The police found her body underneath the bed. She'd been there all night. The official cause of death was ruled inconclusive. No signs of trauma, no obvious explanation. Just a little girl who had gone to sleep and never woken up. Her picture was included in the article. She had dark hair that fell into her eyes. She wore a white dress with little embroidered flowers near the collar. My stomach turned as I stared at her face. I recognized it. I had seen it. She had sat beside my son. She had whispered in his ear. I called the number listed at the bottom of the article. It led to a retired detective who had worked the case. I didn't tell him everything. I just asked him one question. Was there anything strange about the room she died in? He was quiet for a moment before saying, "We got reports after. Families who moved in and moved out. They said their kids didn't sleep. Some refused to stay in the room at all. One boy said he saw Clara, but no one ever had proof." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't go back to the house that day, or the next. I emailed the landlord and told him we were terminating the lease early. I didn't give a reason. I didn't ask for our deposit. I didn't want anything from that place. I just wanted to get Oren as far from it as possible. That night at Marcy's house, Oren slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. No shaking, no crying. Number 317, wake up. When he opened his eyes the next morning, he smiled and said, "She didn't come." I think she stayed in the old house. I believed him. I didn't need more proof. I had seen her. And whatever Clara was, ghost, memory, something darker, she had chosen that house as her place to stay. She had crawled out from under the bed and into my son's life. But not anymore. We were out. And I was never going back. We didn't go back to the house. After we left, I never stepped inside again. The landlord didn't ask questions when I terminated the lease early. Maybe he had heard stories before. Maybe he had seen the pattern. I didn't care. I packed what we needed from storage a few weeks later with Marcy by my side and Oren waiting safely at her place. I never entered his room. I left everything in there. The bed, the bookshelf, the nightlight, all of it. Oren never asked about his toys. He never asked about the house. It was as if he had already closed the door in his mind and had no intention of opening it again. We moved into a new apartment across town. Smaller, older, but it felt clean. Not just the walls or the floors, but the feeling. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. The shadows didn't stretch too far. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight pressing against my chest. Oren began to sleep through the night. Not 3:17 a.m., wake up. No more tears, no more whispers. His laughter returned, soft at first, like he had to relearn the feeling. He started drawing again, pictures of animals and sea creatures. He stopped asking me to check under the bed. One afternoon, he looked up from his sketchbook and said, "I think she found someone else." I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to ask what he meant. I didn't want to know who he thought she might be watching now. I've replayed everything in my mind. Every word, every scream, every second of the footage that disappeared. I used to think ghosts were just metaphors, the past haunting the present, but what we experienced was not grief. It was not memory, it was not imagination, it was real. Oren saw her. I saw her. And I will never forget the way she looked at the camera, like she knew exactly what she was doing, like she knew I would be watching. There is no manual for what to do when your child tells you something terrifying. You try to rationalize it. You try to protect them with logic, nightlights, routines. You say, "There's nothing there." You smile when they say they're scared. You say, "It's okay, it's not real." You do that because the alternative is too much to process. It breaks something inside of you. I ignored the signs longer than I should have. I told myself he was adjusting, that he was reacting to stress, that I was just tired and seeing connections where there were none. But my child was trying to tell me something, over and over, and I didn't listen. Not until it was almost too late. Now, when Oren speaks, I don't dismiss his words. I don't laugh when he says something strange. I listen, fully, without brushing it aside, because I learned that sometimes the things we don't want to believe are the ones we need to hear the most. People have asked me if I've ever tried to talk to someone about what happened, a priest, a medium, a psychic. I haven't. I'm not looking for explanations. I'm not looking for validation. I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. I don't need anyone to tell me it was real. I've stopped watching scary movies. They feel too familiar now. I've stopped using baby monitors. I no longer assume a locked door means we're safe. But most of all, I've stopped doubting my son. If he tells me someone is in the room, I believe him. If he says something feels wrong, I don't question it. He's 5 years old. He doesn't always know how to explain things, but he knew what was under his bed long before I did. He knew something was wrong when I was still pretending everything was fine. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't watched the footage that night, if I had continued brushing it off night after night while something sat silently under his bed, waiting for him to fall asleep. That question still haunts me more than anything. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because sometimes fear is there for a reason. Sometimes it's a warning. And sometimes your child isn't imagining anything. They're surviving something you don't want to see. So if your child ever says, "There's someone under my bed," you check. You stay, you listen, and you believe them. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if it made you think twice about what your child says at night, please like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more real, unsettling stories that stay with you. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Sometimes the scariest things aren't from movies. They're the ones happening right next to us when we think we're alone. Stay safe, stay aware, and always believe your children.